Where's this?
That's what I love about these high school girls, man. I get older, they stay the same age.
Honey!
What?
Where's my super suit? Assemble.
What's up, YouTube? This is your friend, the neighborhood movie nerd, back to give you guys everything that is going on in the world of movies and TV. So this is going to be a little bit of a different episode because, as you guys know, Star Wars: The Clone Wars premieres today, this morning, Friday, the 21st of February. But rather than do another rankings based on whatever's popular and trendy, I just decided to do whatever I felt like, because I'm me, and I do what I want. But I feel like that should be known at this point. So, without further ado, I decided to take one of my absolute favorite TV shows, that being, of course, Black Mirror, the sci-fi technology allegory that covers what the influences of technology on our society and how it is changing us as a species. And so without further ado, I'm going to give you guys another top 10. These are my top 10 favorite Black Mirror episodes. So number 10 is Hang the DJ, which is the 4th episode of season 4 of Black Mirror, directed by Tim Van Patten. The basic plot is the story of two star-crossed lovers, a tale as old as time. However, their only problem in their dating app dictated society, they find that the dating app that determines who their ideal soulmate will be says that they are not an ideal match. Now the question is, what are they willing to go through in order to meet their ideal couple? This episode to me was the most reminiscent of season 3's San Junipero, but I'll tell you the difference between the two and why I like this episode, Hang the DJ, a little bit more. That's because San Junipero, at the end of the day, outside of kind of, for lack of a better word, the gimmick of it just being another fun romantic tale that just happened to be between two lesbians and just happened to take place in a virtual world, this episode actually kind of takes the next logical step in kinds of in terms of determining, okay, so we have these dating apps that determine, you know, kind of our ideal soulmates. The question is, what exactly determines that? Because what Charlie Brooker tries to do here is he kind of tries to, for lack of a better word, give the actual artificial intelligence motivation as to why it handpicks and selects and matches certain people together. So he's basically taking like literally a digital randomizer and trying to give that a consciousness as being told through the ideal stories of these two people who are brilliantly well acted by Georgina Campbell and Joel Cole. And that was actually that's actually a really cool idea and a premise if you think about it. My number 9 is Playtest, the 2nd episode of season 3, directed by 10 Cloverfield Lane's Dan Trachtenberg, which stars Wyatt Russell as a regular guy who's on vacation in Europe. He gets stranded there, and in order to get some money to get back to the States, he ends up volunteering for this experimental video game trial that kind of places him. It's a situation where it's instead of the AI goggles, it's kind of this band that they put around your head that projects you into this kind of virtual online game. So it's kind of doing Bandersnatch before Bandersnatch came out, and there are a couple of twists and turns here, to say the least. The interesting thing about this episode is that it's not really asking a lot of deep questions the way that most Black Mirror episodes do. Rather, it's not taking a stance either. It's mostly just kind of putting you through the journey of the one guy, the one stance of the everyman, kind of just at the mercy of kind of the higher ups without even realizing it. And it's more of a mental manipulation piece, kind of almost at the level of like a David Lynch-esque movie. And I know that the ending turned off a lot of people, but the thing to me that makes it is it kind of, it's not really like making a stance or asking a certain question about technology. At the end of the day, it's kind of just telling you that accidents happen even in perfect systems. The only problem is that when it happens in a perceived perfect system, the repercussions are just so much worse and far spreading. My number 8 is another episode from season 3. That would be episode 3, Shut Up and Dance, directed by James Watkins, the director of The Woman in Black, that movie that came out a few years ago with Daniel Radcliffe. It was like his first movie that people notice him in after Harry Potter. And this episode features the end of the fucking world's Alex Lothar, who becomes blackmailed by a mysterious organization and is forced to do a series of strange tasks that teams him up with Game of Thrones' Jerome Flynn. The basic premise of this episode, you're just following these two guys as they're going throughout London trying to complete a series of very strange tasks that just seem to be kind of placing them in further and further danger. I won't spoil what the end-all be-all twist is, but the interesting thing about this episode and why I think it stuck with me for this long is very similar to what Tom Ford was asking with Nocturnal Animals. This episode kind of asks, what it is that human beings are willing to do in order to cover up their perceived dirty little secrets. And the interesting thing that it also does is it also kind of compares what we perceive as dirty little secrets, because Jerome Flynn, we know what he did and why he's being blackmailed, but we're still not quite sure what it is that Alex Lothar did and why he's being blackmailed. And the reasoning doesn't seem to exactly match up, but by the time the end rolls around, it all makes sense. And it's actually really, really fascinating how this movie makes you empathize and follow its characters and get invested in them. Number 7 is the final episode of season 2. That would be the Waldo Moment, directed by Bryn Higgins. And this one was a little bit of an interesting one because a lot of people were turned off by this episode the first time that it came out. And season 2 to me was always kind of a weird stance with Black Mirror because it was still part of the era when they were owned by the BBC and Channel 4 before Netflix came in and bought them. And the interesting thing about this episode is that now people are kind of regarding it as genius, because the basic premise is that a young comedian finds himself caught up in real-world antics when his creation, a blue cartoon bear named Waldo, ends up becoming so famous for tearing politicians down that he ends up winning the hearts and the minds of the people. The thing about this episode is that people compared it a lot to kind of predicting the Trump election before it came out, and that was always a thing of a little bit of a quiche thing that I thought, I don't know about that. But looking back, I really do think that there is some merit to that. When you think about it, you know, a large part of the reason why Trump won the election is because of his celebrity status, and so kind of talking about the idea of people allowing their celebrity to infringe upon real-world tactics because they want to be so isolated from real-world horrors and terrors. And I thought there was a lot of truth to that, and it actually made this episode very, very compelling, very, very interesting, and honestly one of my favorite television watches. Number 6 is USS Callister, the premiere episode for season 4, the second season of Black Mirror to air on Netflix. This episode was directed by Toby Haynes, and almost immediately you could tell that this was going to be the episode that showed kind of the advancement of Black Mirror. I think it was the one that had the largest budget involved, had the most amount of, I feel like, expanse, for lack of a better word. But the interesting thing is, once again, it keeps it centered on technology and human error with said technology, as the premise is it's a story of a young video game designer with a chip on his shoulder against his company and the world, who takes his frustrations of his isolation out on his AI replicas of his co-workers, as he has created a Star Trek-esque landscape video game artificial virtual program with digitized copies of his co-workers in there that he basically treats as his slaves and playthings. The only difference being that these slaves and playthings are actual people who remember all of their feelings from their real-world counterparts. And besides all of the perceived kind of obvious, you know, creations rebelling against the creator, that sort of theme, I don't like to look at it from that stance. What I prefer to look at it is two things. One, with the Jesse Plemons character and kind of his perceived anger at the world, and really kind of examining what that is, because I feel like that speaks to a lot of people who are on the internet 24/7 and don't have a lot of actual human interaction, and kind of what that does to you, and kind of as to people who are actually judge you versus people who are just being people. And I feel like, again, kind of the virtual interaction kind of confuses that. Adding to that, the idea of these virtual representations of people who are not the people in his real life, who have rejected him from society, and kind of him taking his excess baggage out on that. It's very, very fascinating when you think about it. Number 5 is Be Right Back, the first episode directed by frequent Black Mirror director Owen Harris, who would go on to do episodes Striking Vipers and San Junipero, obviously. And the basic plot for this one is Haley Atwell portrays a woman who recently lost her husband, portrayed by Donald Gleason, and signs up for a program that creates an AI copy of him via a social media profile. Soon enough, however, she discovers that she can actually, in a way, recreate her husband by having a robotic body shipped to her house and being able to download his newly recreated artificial consciousness replica into the body. The thing that I liked about this episode is that I actually wasn't a fan of this episode the first time I saw it, but when I watched it again, I was like, oh wait, this is doing Ex Machina before Ex Machina even became a thing. You know, kind of Ex Machina is all about the Turing test with kind of what it is that we see in machines. Like, well, what is it? How much humanity are machines capable of? And what point do we get to where we can no longer tell the difference? And this episode does that very well. I like that it doesn't kind of take the Terminator angle where it's like, oh, it's only for deception and they're only going to kill us. No, it actually does ask the perceived question, like, did Haley Atwell make the right choice in bringing her husband back? But besides taking just regular human selfishness out of it, just the fact of what she has to do in the end in order to remind herself that this is not her husband, and that as good a copy as it is, it kind of is still a machine. But the episode doesn't take a direct stance and make that statement. It instead, of course, takes itself out of it, lets the characters be the characters, and kind of lets us make our own statement and judgment about exactly what it is that we should be doing. You know, we see that stuff right now with freaking, you know, the blow-ups, the sex dolls, the sex robots that are starting to become so good that they seem to replicate human beings. It's... Number 4 is The Entire History of You, the final episode of season 1. This is the first ever Black Mirror episode that I've watched. It was directed by Brian Welsh and written by Succession creator and Veep co-creator Jesse Armstrong. And in a society where we're equipped with devices that can play back memories as if they were media, one man discovers that his wife may have had an affair. And besides being the first thing that I ever saw that actually proved to me, oh wait, Toby Kebbell can actually act. He's just got a horrific agent. Besides being my introduction to Black Mirror, this was the episode that kind of made me discover, it kind of takes the opposite perspective from Shut Up and Dance, in that it kind of asks, rather than what are we willing to do to hide our dirty little secrets, what are we willing to do in order to kind of find the truth of the matter, even when we know certain things don't work out, and kind of the cost that comes from that, where he is on this quest to find out who his wife had an affair with, if she actually had an affair, and the repercussions that come from that. And to say that it's messed up is one thing, but this even takes the extra step in terms of asking that kind of, this is because, again, it's only the 3rd episode ever of Black Mirror, but it kind of begs the question that a lot of people have asked since the internet kind of became a thing and more mainstream, which is, what is the cost of too much information and having the ability to gain all of this information? Number 3 is another episode from season 1, 15 Million Merits, directed by Euros Lyn, and another introduction to one of my favorite British actors, Daniel Kaluuya, who stars as a man who lives in this underground bunker society where people have to ride exercise bikes every day in order to compete for food and money. But the only way to kind of advance and climb up the literal societal ladder of getting from underground to above ground is to compete in this talent show. What the talents are, that is completely determined by the 3 judges, who determine whether you are entertaining and worthy enough in order to literally ascend to the next level. And I would say this is probably the most literal Black Mirror episode in terms of its message that it's trying to say, and it kind of doesn't really go for the technology aspect, more so going for, this episode came out in 2011, so it was before like the smartphones really had a grip on our society, and so it was more so taking it from the advantage of reality TV, which is a thing that another episode in season 2, White Bear, would attempt to tackle. But it's definitely, the straightforward edge definitely helps, because even though the message is obvious, what I like about it so much is showing, A, what we're willing to do in order to climb the perceived media ladder that is presented to us constantly through us watching TV, but also kind of what we have to do when we get there. Because we hear a lot of stories about celebrities. Everyone here, everyone has at least met one celebrity, but discovers that it usually never measures up to their expectations. And the reasoning for that is because when you get to kind of that certain level of fame, people begin to realize that that's isolating in and of its own right, because once you're there, you have to maintain it. And that's a whole different struggle in and of itself. Number 2 is Bandersnatch, the 2018 special that came out that was directed by David Slade, who had previously directed an episode for Black Mirror. That would be season 4's 5th episode, Metalhead. But unlike Metalhead, which was very basic and straightforward, this was literally, besides being, again, another foray into unknown territory for Black Mirror, it was also an unknown foray for just media in general, because it's, to me at least, the first choose-your-own-adventure that was actually compelling. The basic story itself is about a young video game designer portrayed by Fionn Whitehead, who gets hired by a huge gaming conglomerate but gets way in over his head as he discovers that his own choose-your-own-adventure is literally being used to dictate the story. So this was kind of the next step into what I'll call has been phase 3 of Black Mirror, which would eventually lead into season 5, because the thing that I liked about season 5 that I didn't like about it at first is that it started to ask different questions about technology, not so much being a cautionary tale against technology, but more so kind of showing the continued effects of technology in a society that has already surrendered to it. And this was kind of the precursor for it. But what I like about this episode so much, and the thing that differentiates this and places it above so many of the other episodes for me that may be more consistent with their themes, this episode kind of is probably the first meta episode in that the metatextuality of kind of the choose your own adventure format literally dictates the story about the choose your own adventure format. So in a way, we're still living through this character, even though we're the ones that are dictating the story. To put it in basic movie terms, it's basically taking Deadpool and turning it into Free Guy. And my number 1 absolute favorite episode of Black Mirror so far. I love this episode the first minute that I watched it. I believe it was only my second ever, third ever Black Mirror episode that I watched, but it had an immediate effect on me, which is of course the premiere episode of season 3, Nosedive, directed by Joe Wright, who is a director that I couldn't care less about until he directed this freaking episode. And oh man, I think the reason why, well, first off, the basic story. Bryce Dallas Howard portrays a woman who attempts to make her way to her best friend's wedding in a society where likes on your social media page determine your ultimate social status. And I feel like this is the episode that, besides kind of taking all of the themes of Black Mirror and making it the most effective, for lack of a better word, this was the episode that kind of made me realize the actual effects that this kind of technology has on our society and how it changes our mindsets without even realizing it. Because it takes all of the typical social BS norms that have been around for decades and puts them to the forefront. This episode is shallow, this episode is self-centered, and this episode is ridiculously over the top, but that's the point. It's taking all of our perceived ideas of what is kind of cool and hip and who is, you know, the prettiest and kind of just rips the Band-Aid off and shows just like how full of shit everyone really is. And the overall biggest question that I feel like it asks that makes this episode resonate so well is when we're so willing to, it kind of exposes the imprisoning effects of society and puts it to the forefront, where we're so willing to buy into kind of this social club, this social clique, that we kind of sacrifice a piece of ourselves in order to do it. We kind of sacrifice our own mental and individual freedom in order to do it. Which again, I'm not going to say that's the overall theme of Black Mirror in general, but it certainly is one of their biggest ones. So with that being said, those are my top 10 absolute favorite Black Mirror episodes. I cannot wait to see what comes next. So tune in next time in order to continue with more of Movie Nerd reviews and more rankings. I'll catch you guys next time.